And we're live. Welcome to the live stream, everyone. I'm super excited to have with me today Justin Tabb from Substratum. We're going to be talking about net neutrality. Justin, welcome.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, unfortunately, we did invite also Bruce from NKN. He's otherwise engaged. Colin Cantrell may still hop in at some point during the chat, so keep an eye out for that. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. I feel like there are so many misconceptions around what is going on with net neutrality. And so I really wanted to get someone like you on to actually, because you live it, you're there, this is what you're doing. And
Good.
so I feel like so many people just totally misunderstand it though. So can you just give us the breakdown? What is net neutrality and what are some of the common misconceptions around it?
Yeah, absolutely. So net neutrality is basically saying that you want a neutral internet, right? So you want the internet to be fair and free for all people, equal access and equal speed to all information all across the world, right? So the argument usually comes in that, well, we don't want regulation telling us how to have a neutral internet because regulation stifles innovation. And I agree with that, right? But the other side of the argument is, well, without regulation, then ISPs and governments are going to be able to dictate who can see what information. And that also stifles innovation and also stifles communication and the way people communicate worldwide. And thereby, basically gives an uneven playing ground, uneven landscape to people all across the world and to companies all across the world. So what we've really tried to do is come in and say, well, we agree with both sides of that and say that a technological solution is the only answer to this problem. Because if it's a governmental solution, then that has the ability to change. And also it's not worldwide. Only a technological solution can answer this problem worldwide forever.
That's right. It shouldn't be a question of trust. And this is what it comes down to when you're leaving it to the government or when you're leaving it to the corporations to decide what's actually going on. You're just saying, I trust Comcast to make the best decisions for the internet. And that's a very dangerous proposition because
Yep.
Comcast is not here to provide a public good. They're here to make money for their shareholders.
That's right. And so there's actually been instances in the past where before there were the Title II regulations in the United States, which for people who aren't familiar, that's what this whole huge thing is about, is that, under the Obama administration, there were Title II regulations, which basically ensured that, the internet for the most part should remain neutral. It basically prohibited internet service providers from being able to throttle, from being able to basically block access to certain sites because the most extreme form of a non-neutral internet is, of course, internet censorship like China. But so there have been instances in the past where ISPs have basically promoted, like made faster access to something that they have a vested interest in, or said things like where it's give it a zero term that you'll probably hear. And what that means is a zero rating basically does not go against your data plan. So they could say, okay, for you to go to Facebook is absolutely free. It doesn't cost you anything. But if you want to go to Facebook's new competitor that's up and coming, then that's going to go against your data plan and that's going to cost you money. So what are you going to do? You're going to go to Facebook. So that's that, or whatever the example is, right? So that stifles creativity and stifles innovation going forward.
Absolutely. And that stifling of innovation is a massive problem. Now, with the rulings the way they are currently, let's say particular segments of a website, could those be blocked out? Have we got Colin coming in here? We might have Colin
Like
popping in. Hey, it's Colin. Colin, welcome to the party.
Hey, yeah, we had a time zone change. I thought it was an hour from now. Sorry.
That's okay, man. That's okay. Welcome to the party. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to
Hey,
meet Justin before from Substratum.
Hey, what's up, Justin?
Nice to meet you, Colin.
Likewise.
So we've just started jumping into the net neutrality topic, basically, and we're just kind of breaking down what are some of the misconceptions of net neutrality and what are some of the things that people kind of misunderstand about it. So since you just jumped in here, Colin, let's get your take on it real quick. What do you think are some of the key misconceptions about net neutrality?
I think that just because that there's an option, say ISPs to discern differently, and there's no legal boundary, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to collude and start controlling information. I mean, I'm always about a free and open internet, and I mean, we see places like China demonstrating censorship with that. So just because the option's there doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. But then the other side of the coin is too, well, if there's not legal protection, what's the incentive for an ISP to not, let's say, throttle bandwidth for another corporation or control some of the IP infrastructure? So, I mean, there's two sides of the coin. And I mean, I'm ultimately an advocate of it, seeing it as free and open as possible, since, I mean, sometimes information can be controversial. Sometimes information can be damaging. As we know, knowledge is power. So, I mean, when you couple that into, let's say, incentives for businesses or ISPs, you do open up potential recipes for disaster in, you know, I mean, our ability to have free and open information.
That's it. We were just basically, just before we hopped in, we just said, how much do you actually trust Comcast? And that's kind of what it comes down to an extent. Well, now that I've got both of you in here, just a quick note. So I got a lot of questions here to get through today in general, so we'll just try and keep the answers, you know, basically how we've been going with, you know, nice, short, succinct answers. And I'll try and get some questions coming in from the audience here as well. So if anyone's got any real pressing questions to ask about, particularly the topic of net neutrality and how technology can help address that, feel free to write them in the chat here, guys. I got a nice big list of questions, so we'll just start rolling through those. So let's go on to our next one here. The question I was in the process of asking would be, what would stop, or is it possible for the companies to stop a certain segment of a website? For example, I've got a cryptocurrency YouTube channel. Would it be possible for Comcast to say, well, YouTube is fine, but we're going to just throttle back these certain segments of your website?
So there's actually two different approaches that are coming in right now towards censoring the internet, and that's basically what a non-neutral internet looks like in the most extreme form, is censorship. So the first way is them taking and saying, the way China did and the way actually Russia did, and they say, okay, we're going to block, you know, certain sites, certain IP addresses like Russia did recently, and we're going to take all those out. You can't go to any of those completely. The second one is actually a little bit more difficult to even probably get around, and that's the way the European Union is doing right now with their copyright directive, Article 13, and actually Vietnam right now as well had a law passed this week that basically require website owners to, the Vietnam law for in specificity, it requires website owners to take content that's uploaded, store it locally, and then if it's in violation of, let's say, it criticizes the government, remove that within 24 hours. The European Union's copyright directive, the Article 13, does the same thing. There's all kinds of news on the internet this week that it'll actually kill memes and things like that. I don't know about that, but the more you actually look into it, the sort of more scary that one gets, because it puts the onus on businesses and on website owners to actually filter that content in some way and say that if it offends someone, or if it basically takes someone's work and basically reuses it or something to that effect, the way like a meme would, then they need to remove that. And so to your point there, yes, in that way they could say, okay, all this content here in regard to cryptocurrency is against stuff that whatever government believes in, and since we want to make sure as YouTube that we can service that particular government, the European Union has a GDP comparable to the United States, you know, similar. So if this law goes into effect and people go, well, it's only going to affect the European Union people. Well, not necessarily, because if YouTube as a website owner wants to be in compliance with that, then they're going to have to basically filter that as well. And so, yes, that actually can be dangerous. So there's, you know, those two ways that they're coming at it. And that's why our solution actually looks at two different ways for that. But that is a real scary thing. And to your point, you know, that could actually filter your specific content while leaving other content up.
Interesting. Colin, I got a question here. I'll get you to jump in on this one. It's from Salomon Markovich. He says there seems to be misconception with net neutrality. He says the net neutrality laws subsidize Google and monopolies by giving them a discount on bandwidth. He says it helps them. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, Google does kind of have its own ISP anyway. So, I mean, in some respects, it can help it. That's where you have to look at all of the facts on it. I mean, net neutrality really was just lifting kind of the law that was stating that you have to conform to certain standards. So in some respects, we got to look at it from the consumers or the ISP side. I mean, as an ISP, yes, it does give me more freedom to make better business choices. So maybe that could provide a better service. But on the other side, as a consumer, there's the fear of, let's say, me not being able to access my website. We've already seen that firewall in China. I mean, I think the bigger pressing issue that net neutrality is bringing out from the consumer's perspective is the idea of censorship, which we have seen happening. And as you know, the ISPs, they all actually have kind of an unwritten pact with one another where they actually route each other's packets. That's why IP unicast is the primary source, and IP multicast never really took off because they said, well, we're not going to route IP multicast packets for other ISPs. So there's already forms of collusion going on between these ISPs. And I see net neutrality opening up our eyes, I guess you can say. Whatever this law does or doesn't do, I think they've probably already been doing what they can within the boundaries of it. I think it's a good opportunity for us to assess. I mean, does the current way the system works actually provide the greatest value of the internet to people? And I mean, from those conversations, then we can start to discern and make better decisions and state, well, you know, what can we do to improve this, and what can we do to put the internet more in our hands? Because ISPs are going to collude no matter what. They're big businesses. I mean, Google's going to pay them for cheaper, easier bandwidth, and they're going to suck up most of the bandwidth of their internal network. I mean, there's a lot of different things that are going to happen, and that's how the internet already works. I mean, the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is, you know, the decentralized working group to standardize all the RFCs and the ISOs on the internet, it's basically owned by a different corporation every so years. You know, it's Cisco this, Google the next year, and I mean, in controlling those specific narratives and things like that, you do end up with another whole dimension of problems. So, I guess in a long-formed answer, I do believe, yes, there's both sides of the coin. I'm not necessarily sure if net neutrality is a silver bullet for the consumer and for censorship, but I think it's lifting the veil on what we conventionally have thought the internet to be, and making us start to question whether it's going to function in our best interest or not, and to what levels are these corporations going to collude to make it less free.
Absolutely great point there, without a doubt. Justin, I want to throw this one over to you, and this is the idea. Look, if we have private companies like Comcast or whoever else might be the big providers, is it really, do we have to demand for them to actually provide a neutral internet? I mean, they're providing a pay-to-play service essentially.
Yeah. So I actually had this question a while back, and so, you know, yes, they're out to make money, right? They're a business, and they should have right to make business decisions, which is why I fully advocate that there does not need to be a political solution to this problem. There needs to be a technological solution, right? Can't count on politicians, and I wouldn't want a politician telling me how I can run my business, or any government, right? So I heard someone a while ago actually say, well, what's the big deal? If I want to send a package to someone, I can choose priority mail, right? And I can get it there faster. So that's all they're saying, right? Is, you know, and that, but no, that's sort of not what they're saying. Because if you look in countries, I believe it's Portugal, you know, where they're saying, well, if you want to even be able to get to social media sites, you have to pay extra for that, right? You got to pay $9.99 extra a month. So the equivalent that I gave in that analogy is that, okay, if I want faster internet, just like if I want priority mail, I can pay for faster internet. But what this is talking about is them having the capability of being able to say, if you want to mail a package to Hawaii, it costs 3 times as much as if you want to mail a package to Florida, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and basically saying traffic to website A is cheaper than traffic to website B. And so, you know, I agree that, you know, great, you know, is the whole thing going to fall apart tomorrow? No. But, you know, people, Colin, before you came on, we talked about there needing to be the two sides of the argument that one side demanding a neutral internet stifles innovation. And I agree with that because it's a political solution. But the other side of the argument saying that it doesn't provide, without that, there's a risk of not having equal access to all people world. And I agree with that, which is why I think there needs to be a technological solution to the problem, not a political solution, and not trusting corporations to basically make those decisions for us. You know, there needs to be a way that comes in that says, with this, you know, they can have faster speeds if they want, but it's all going to ensure that we can at least get to everything, and that within our bandwidth package that we've bought, that we can get equal speed to everything.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I agree on the technological solution. Political solutions tend to run into a whole other mess of problems than they tend to solve.
And they're temporary, right?
I mean, the legalities of the system are based upon the performance of the legal system. And, you know, let's say there's non-collusion there, or, you know, I mean, there's so many other factors that come into it. So I'm 100% aligned. There needs to be technological solutions. I mean, just like blockchain does, it's a technological solution to solve some of these problems of, let's say, centralized services being able to include, because you have mathematical proofs. And so the more and more technology that we have to be able to provide that for ourselves, then the less these types of things influence.
Awesome, guys. The chat is definitely going in the direction we want to be going in. Now, I want to flip this around a little bit. Some of the regular criticisms that come out are that if we have these regulations here, they're actually going to be hurting investment, and that, of course, people will be happy to pay for this premium access. So is it a danger that red tape is going to kill the internet? Justin, you want to hop in on that first?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to what we just said. I mean, I agree, I'm of smaller government, right? Let innovation go forward. Let companies come up with new solutions, and we'll sort of get where we want to go, because people will then choose what they want as a whole, right? And that's sort of what blockchain is like the voice of the many outweighing sort of the voice of the few, right? Consensus. What do people really want? And people choose that with their dollars. Like, what do they invest in? What do they purchase? And so, yes, I think that anytime there's political red tape, yes, it stifles innovation. So just like we both sort of agreed on, we don't. I'm actually, people say, well, hey, let's go and let's voice our concerns and get these net neutrality repealed again. I don't even get involved in that, because I don't think that it needs to be, right? I think they just need to let it go and let all these great companies that are out there move forward and come up with the true solution, the permanent solution. Because even if you did repeal it and you got all those Title II protections put back in, it only applies to the United States. So all these other things, European Union, China, Russia, Vietnam, however many others that have things currently going with censorship aren't even affected in that. But even if you got that all put back in 8 years or whatever, or 4 years, when you have a new president, whatever it is, and a new Congress, could get flipped right back. So it's a temporary solution when it comes from the political angle, but from a technological solution, it is permanent. And that's really where, with everything, I believe.
Well, that's it. And that the technological solution is so much of why I wanted to actually have this conversation today, because it comes down to the sense of you don't have to trust the players out there. You can actually have trustless systems in place, essentially technology running, that are going to be really moving this. So, Colin, I want to flip this one over to you. What's your opinion, I guess, on the current state of the infrastructure of the internet?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, it's run by large corporations. So, I mean, no one single corporation controls it. It's a bit of an oligarchy, but I mean, ISPs route all of the traffic, and they have the discernment of what packets they may route. They can censor IP addresses. They can do anything they pretty much want. I mean, a Bitcoin packet has 4 leading bytes that uniquely identify it. I mean, there's ways that it can be filtered, but ultimately it comes down to hardware. I mean, we got the OSI reference stack, right? And the bottom layer of this is the physical links. And that's where I really think that there needs to be some innovation on the technology, because that's something that truly becomes distributed, because Bitcoin is a distributed software solution, right? But it still runs on the rails of the conventional system. So if we don't have our new type of hardware that is an actual distributed network, not one where you basically have to route into a local ISP and then hop between each of their routers till you get to your local ISP network, and then route to your local area network, and then so on and so forth, you can have something that maybe has a more distributed mesh topology like Bitcoin was designed to be on the software. So I see it as mirroring hardware and software. If we don't look at all aspects of the OSI reference stack, we're going to be missing some of the pieces that can still cause collusion. I mean, on layer 2, which is data link layer, or layer 3, which is your IP network layer, I mean, there can still be collusions, and ISPs do operate on some of those levels. I mean, they generally handle some of the actual Ethernet layers. So, I mean, controlling that doesn't necessarily come with solving it with software. I mean, you have to solve some of it with hardware as well. More of the world connected and open too, because the bottom line is they control the internet because they control the hardware. They control the physical links. And if we don't have those physical links, then our software means nothing.
Awesome. I've got a great question here from B. Wolf. He says, what about people in the U.S.? What if they only have one option for an ISP? Will they be forced to pay more in these situations, or will there be options to get out of that? Go ahead.
Well, that's generally what happens when you have a monopoly. That's why, Bell got broken up, by AT&T numerous times, because it became too big and it controlled everything. And when you have a monopoly, you have no competitors, and then your technology can be crap. And let's really look at the brass facts here too. ISPs have the worst customer service of any industry known to man. Why? Because they can. Because you need internet. I want to go to my Facebook. I want to use this, and they can hire, people out in some foreign country that doesn't know how to speak English, that doesn't know how to fix it, and charge you astronomical amounts of money, and run poorly created networks, and you get what you get, and that's really kind of how it is, because, there's 7 billion in the world, there's only 2 billion that have access to the internet. So in that sense, there's a very small amount of people that actually have access. So, if there were 7 billion people that had 7 billion connections to the internet, it would be a different story because you'd have a lot more companies doing it. But right now, the internet's still growing. It's still small. And so, in those stages, there's a lot of companies that do generally control that. So, the long answer is, yeah, when somebody is able to just be the only option, then they really dictate the policy because, if people want it, then that's what they have. And there's nothing they can do unless they build it themselves.
Awesome. Justin, I want to flip back over to you for a moment here. Now, obviously, I think we could all agree that the internet needs decentralization, the centralization of the internet service providers as well as the hardware providers, and basically everything else right down the line is dangerous to freedom, I guess we could kind of say. So what do you think are the best decentralization methods to actually give the power of the internet back to the individual?
It's tough. So, obviously, the approach that we're taking is probably a little bit different than Colin's taking. Understandably, that ISPs can filter, and governments too, based off identifiable items in basically the packets, right? So the approach that we've taken is we've masqueraded those packets where they look like any other packet. So it's unidentifiable from anything else. So we're working within the standard TCP stack, and our packets are literally masqueraded as a standard HTTP request. Sometimes they're actually masqueraded as a game request. Sometimes they're masqueraded as a video streaming. So it's unidentifiable from anything else within our CORS packets. So I think the biggest things that people need to have is the ability to communicate above all. And so the decentralization technologies that are going towards that, us and Colin and potentially a few others out there, I think those are actually going to be the biggest ones. You look at Bitcoin and you look at what Bitcoin gave us, pretty much everyone in the world agrees the biggest thing it gave us is the blockchain, regardless of what you think of the cryptocurrency. And so using that to reach into new basically demographics, into new business lines is, I think, really going to be where you really see the vertical growth within this space. And I think that, going forward, that's where you'll see the real impact is, people using that to reach out to things like making sure that people can communicate freely across the world. Finance is a huge thing, but some people, like a lot of people actually in our community, could care less about cryptocurrency. They're after the free and open internet. They want to make sure that their children and their grandchildren's children or whatever are going to be able to communicate the way we can or better. And I think that that's really resonated with a lot of people. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of impact in the coming days.
Awesome. I really feel that in the sense of so many people get caught up in the idea of the price of the crypto asset on any given day. Yeah. And a lot of the underlying technology, I know, guys, I know, right?
Oh yeah, we both know. When Moon, when Lambo.
Exactly. But the underlying fundamentals don't change, right?
It just came out of 2017. All of a sudden people are saying when Moon and when Lambo, and I'm like, oh, man.
Yep. Yeah. It's nuts. It really is. Like someone asked a while back, they said, what do you think, what has been the biggest challenge going forward so far? And that has to be it. It's lack of patience. Like there's in the crypto community, in the cryptocurrency community, people are used to these just huge exponential growths overnight. And they're like, what's taking so long? Nothing great comes fast. Let's be honest. Nothing world changing comes fast. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we said from the beginning, while quick gains are wonderful, and we hope that happens, we're really out to have something that's developed perfectly and that has staying power and that's really going to stick around and make a difference. Not out there to just put something out quick to make money. It's just not what we're after. And that really is the biggest challenge. I'm not sure if Colin would agree, but that we run into in the space is just these of these wild expectations of, why isn't this happening in 3 days? And it's this pressure on you that shouldn't really be there. We've delivered, a first version in under 8 months, and then 4 more versions after that in the last 7 weeks. And that's incredibly fast. We continuously deliver, and to be able to deliver this kind of product in under a year is just phenomenal, I think. Yeah. And and it's just like these crazy expectations, and so that definitely has been the biggest thing that we've bumped up against, in this space that has been a challenge for sure.
Colin, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, this is kind of a bit segueing into a conversation I was having a little earlier today about the butterfly effect. When you're building technology, let's look at not the block size for Bitcoin. Let's say the block reward halving. Let's fast forward 50 years from now, right? Now, for all we know, Satoshi could have been like a half works. It mimics radioactive decay. It's like a half-life, but it works for now. It'll make sure that it's deflationary. And what if 50 years from now there's this, the happening is coming, and everybody's freaking out, and it's just quick decision made now. But I mean, when you're building these technologies, especially that the world's going to use, it exponentially expands as more and more people use it, and the effect becomes larger upon everybody. And so, I mean, every little decision that's made in these early days is extremely important, and rushing that it's irresponsible. And so it's good to see, Justin, that you guys are on that same kind of perspective. And it's kind of against the grain of crypto, because there's a lot of other cryptocurrencies that, may say that they're going to do everything in 3 days and create these unrealistic expectations, or, maybe it's the impatience of people kind of mass coming together in mass and, coming with pitchforks and torches or whatever, because, there's a certain financial incentive to, cracking a whip, say. But, I mean, ultimately the cryptocurrencies that are slow and methodical and take their time. I mean, look at Bitcoin. They take their time building everything. They do it very slowly. They do it very methodically, and for a very good reason. And the developers that hold those perspectives, I mean, the speculators are going to come and go. People are going to speculate on price. They're going to have their risk. They're going to buy, sell on a pump, whatever. But ultimately what's going to happen is the guys that build the real technology are the ones that are going to become the Googles and the Facebooks and of the blockchain future. Because, I mean, we're essentially building layers of abstraction on top of the internet as we exist. I mean, I was talking a little bit about the OSI reference stack, which you have your physical link, which is layer 1. Then you have your Ethernet 2. Then you have your IP layer, which is layer 3. And then you have TCP IP, which is your transport. And then you have your session layer, layer 5, which is socket, and then layer 6, data representation, which is where HTTP would exist, and then layer 7, application, right? So most blockchains sit here on layer 7, right? I mean, you could argue that the block and all that protocol is layer 6, data representation, but there's going to be more and more layers of abstraction built on it. So if we go back and we look at the physical link, and if we're still running phone lines, everything's going to be bottlenecked. Or if there's problems on the IP layer, everything's going to be drastically affected. So even now, a blockchain is still a low layer on abstraction. I mean, if you've read some of the Tritium white paper, we talk about how we're developing software stack on top of the OSI as layers of abstraction in order to create those definitive uses, and then one builds upon the other, and then also learning to use the right one for the right purpose. But the blockchain is still the ledger. It's sitting there right on layer 7, and there's smart contract layers, and then more and more and more and more, and then IPFS, and then data management, and then logical. And I mean, you get higher and higher. So when we're down here on the ledger, and we're down here, I mean, with Substratum on, let's say, layer 6 with HTTP doing data representation, I mean, you're still going to have a lot of layers of abstraction built on top of that. And if you don't make sure this is perfect, you're going to have problems up here that are going to have to retrace back down to here. And then architecturally, you bake the architecture into your original design. So if you don't thoroughly think through how you're going to design the base architecture, even the class or data representation, or even just the way that you're running your protocol or handling your sockets, I mean, you're going to create further and further bottlenecks, and it's going to be harder and harder and harder to change that as you build more and more layers of abstraction on top of that. So ultimately, yes, it's very, 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 very important to take very seriously these foundational stages, because if you don't, then it's not going to last through time. And cryptocurrency has a promise to last of years, potentially. I mean, depending on how we engineer it and what we can really find uses for it. And I mean, we look at the internet, it's only 40 years, but 40 years, it's still, I mean, it's quite a significant time. I guess 30 years would be better for Milnet and ARPANET in the 80s. But I mean, physical networks started around in the early 70s with, small local areas. But ultimately, like, we're building something for the future. And, if you're going to get a little frustrated about 8 months or a year or whatever, I mean, that's very small thinking compared to the macro concepts of the impact this technology has become a world.
Absolutely. I mean, where are we going to be in 10 years? You look at 10 years ago when Bitcoin started, and a lot of people didn't even, of course, know about it until a few years in at least. And then as it started to build and build and build and build and build, and of course, the technology hasn't changed fundamentally behind Bitcoin. Well, the price may have, but the same idea remains. It is a robust blockchain that allows for the transfer of value from one person to another. And that's a pretty powerful thing to be up and running for 10 years. And of course, to see where we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years with so many of these interesting projects being developed now is a very important and very interesting question. I want to talk about hardware momentarily, though. And Justin, you can jump in on this first. So we have a situation right now where I imagine pretty similar in the United States, for example. Here in New Zealand, my fiber lines for the internet are owned by a different company than the ISP. And so we have this situation where we have these, broadband lines and these different things. How does the hardware factor into trying to create a new internet, and can that be used as a way of censorship too via the hardware, the actual lines and cables?
So again, this is where we take.
Go ahead, Justin, first, and we'll hop into you after
so,
this call.
So this is where we take a little bit different approach, because there's lots of companies out there, competitors, and I won't say their name because I never like to talk bad about anybody, but we're going at the approach from, a total mesh network. And so what the initial approach that we've taken is mesh over ISP. So we want to be able to still use the existing internet structure that's there, and then be able to route over that ISP through a network of nodes that basically you have, Substratum node that runs on individual machines. And then basically we've built cores packets, which is what we're calling it, that basically bounces within those nodes and basically sort of takes the off ramp, if you want to see that, instead of the main highway. So that enables us to basically get up and going faster. Of course, basically then when we initially look at it, we go, well, okay, if China can block all non-approved VPNs, then how do we make sure that we don't sort of fall in that same category? And so the answer to that again is basically working within the standard TCP stack, and then basically obfuscating and masquerading. We call it masquerading, where basically we're making our packets look like a normal other packet. So there's no way basically with our system it would either be all on, or all off. So if something like North Korea, of course, until they open up internet access into there, we can't penetrate. But anywhere else, China, it's the same thing. They can't identify our packet from another type of packet. It's just impossible, because we're literally masquerading as something that we're not. So that's sort of, basically when you look at the hardware, I'm not sure, again, we've operated at the lowest level we can with mesh over ISP. We're not developing our own protocol. It's working within the standard protocol. So as long as standard HTTP traffic continues to run, or HTTPS traffic continues to run, then the system will work just fine. And I don't see that going anywhere anytime soon. So our system should be, sort of immune from that. But, other things, like I've even seen, where Bitcoin, like, as James' point was, it's identifiable. So yes, I guess within the hardware, you could say, identify those packets and basically block them. So yeah, to your point, I guess that is a way where that could be blocked, but we've really tried to take steps to make sure that can't happen within Substratum.
Awesome. Yeah, and you guys have that sort of one-click set up the software, and you can be partaking in the decentralization of the internet from your home computer. Now, Colin, I want to switch over to you here, because the Nexus approach to the decentralization model through hardware actually is really interesting. I want to know if you could expand a little bit on that for us, about the satellites that you guys are looking to put into space and all these different things.
Yeah, it's hardware and software to a level. So, at layer 3, the physical link, as I was saying, is layer 1. You have the IP, and that's a big problem that you run into, since that's an actual route, and you need that to route through the routers. Like the way torrents are being kind of caught right now is Warner Brothers or whatever will run a seed, and they'll catch all of the IP addresses of everybody that's actually seeding that data, and then they can use that to look it up to the local ISP and then send you a cease and desist letter or anything else like that. So, in a similar sense, China is probably going to try to do the same thing. That's why you need to get down to these lower layers of abstraction. So, what I've seen is that satellites, nanosats, are coming to the point where they're going to be able to be put into people's hands. But what we have the problem with is, you can't, if we just built this whole internet infrastructure and we launched all the Cube satellites and we developed all these mesh networks, it would be the same problem, because it would be just Nexus. So the thing that is arming people with the ability to do it themselves. Right now, there's a barrier to entry. Like, what do I use for bit modulation pattern for the standard level 1? What frequency ranges can I use? Is it within licensed FCCs? Everything like that. You get this whole new mess of things. But we're paving forward and figuring out those solutions, and then creating standardization processes between layer 1 so that satellites can cross-link and talk to one another. and building that open source model so that anybody will be able to deploy their own. Anybody can launch their own, let's say, ground station, and then creating an economic incentive for the individual to do that. And then the network builds itself. We provide the blueprint and the architecture and pave out those first few steps, of figuring out the unknown. And then other people can take that model and improve upon it, just like Bitcoin, just source technology, and then increase the utilization of it and build those mesh networks out and then use those satellites to talk. And so, we ultimately have a big problem. Like if we go back to Soviet Russia, they tapped our cables and they were using that to listen to some of our communication. And they didn't think that it was tappable, but there's still an electromagnetic field. You just need to basically have sensitive enough equipment to be able to catch the modulation patterns of that electromagnetic field. And then you got all the bits. Now, encryption helps with that. But ultimately, I've seen certain islands where the cables are cut, because what happens is these cables are strung across the ocean floor. It costs about $300 million, I think, for AT&T to string one from Europe to the US. We look at the cost of nanosats being $50,000, $100,000. Now, the question of their bandwidth comes into account, and latency, of course, but low Earth orbit helps with that. And you also have more ground communication systems happening. Let's say semi trucks having the ability to route for one another, and then highways become wireless broadcasting systems. And then you don't rely on the central infrastructure, just like ISPs. They do it already. They already have this model. They're just a bunch of big companies routing each other's traffic. But when you have smaller people routing each other's traffic, then you create a truly distributed internet that can't be shut down and can't really be censored. Even if, they try to, let's say, censor one IP address, well, that can be chosen and you can take another route, or you can choose another satellite if somebody is censoring that specific data. But when you have this closed door gatekeeper, they can basically do anything on layer 3, which you can't really change. Even if you create higher layers of abstraction on TCP/IP or encryption or anything like that, you still run into the IP packet, the raw IP packet on top of the Ethernet, on top of the physical link, still needs to route. And routers physically route based on that IP address and who has those assigned. So that's the biggest problem that we fundamentally face. And I really admire what you guys, Justin, are doing with the, utilizing software solutions and obfuscation. And I think the software solutions are a necessary step along with the solutions. They both go hand in hand. And I think the more people that are going out there and speaking about this is going to make people more aware. But ultimately, I believe the internet should be by the people for the people. And, if somebody only has one ISP, they have no other options. But hey, if I have a local mesh network and maybe there's a ground station locally enough and maybe I got a satellite, I got a link. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to obviously have to be built out over time, and we're going to have to still utilize ISPs to a certain extent. But the idea is that you create a swarm effect where more and more people that have this model and this gets cheaper and cheaper can say, hey, I just, I hooked my router up to this mesh network, and now I can actually route packets and talk to my friend or my neighbor, down the street without having to deal with the internet. If I want to have a secure conversation, I know it's a secure conversation. And then you tie in location identity separation protocol, which is something Dino Farinacci has built it. We've been working with them. Then you actually decouple your IP address from your actual endpoint identifier. And then it's the mapping servers that do some of the discernment. So you don't necessarily have to have your location associated with your routing locator. So that basically means that I could have a phone number, but you'll never know exactly where I am in the world. I'll just pop up every once in a while, and then you can talk to me there. But it doesn't mean this is my house. So you get higher levels of privacy. And then you get up to the TCP, like Substratum is working with, and the obfuscation with packets to look like normal traffic. That's a very good approach in, I guess, getting rid of censorship, because, the ISPs still want to route normal customers' traffic. And if you look like a normal customer, it's going to be the needle in the haystack problem. And that's going to be difficult for them to see. So, ultimately, to make a free, decentralized internet, it's going to take a lot of people doing it and a lot of people thinking about it.
Yep,
and
you got
a lot of people
absolutely. And, and that's, from the beginning, we've said that. You can write the greatest thing in the world, and if you don't, and if it's decentralized and requires on a bunch of people and nobody adopts it, then it doesn't matter. Exactly. And so, I admire what you guys are doing. It's definitely, and I think maybe the two come together one day. You never know, so it's
worth some discussion too. We're kind of in the collaborative, I guess you could say, economic systems. I believe competition is reaching an asymptote, and it really doesn't serve to a certain level. And coming back to the metaphor, with even Metcalfe's law with telecommunication system, it states that the value of a telecommunication system is based on the square of the participants. So ultimately, mathematically provably, for competing against 4 is 16 versus 16, but 8 together is 64. That's 4 times the amount. So ultimately, collaboration does prove, to work, and that's what decentralization is about. You collaborate with different decentralized nodes. So,
Yep.
I mean, I hope to see that spirit coming out more and more as more and people start to think about these things that are actually quite important for, the future of humanity in some respects.
Well, and absolutely. I mean, I think,
Go ahead, Justin.
I've, built my whole career off of trying to find people that are smarter than myself to work with. And in my office, everyone will tell you that that's at least what I believe. So, I feel like if I'm the dumbest guy in the room, then I'm doing pretty good.
Yep.
And so, I absolutely believe, collaboration is huge. That's why we've made our node open source. And, our plans are actually for all 3 of our products. We have one that's unannounced so far, but all 3 of our products become platforms, because I think that's really where you get the huge vertical growth, is when you let developers come in and say, okay, you've given me the tools to work with to do this, and now I can go and because nobody all has the same experience and the same skill set and everything like that, and so everybody has their own take, and when you really enable people to do that, that's when you really see the future sort of go forward in a huge vertical growth fashion. So
I agree.
Justin, I want to put this question to you real quick, and it's about blockchain-based internet. So right now, Sub is running on Ethereum. Obviously, Ethereum's had scaling issues. Is that going to be a problem for blockchain-based companies that want to really help us decentralize the internet, that blockchain may not be a good fit for actually delivering this content, that network congestion times? I mean, if there's a big ICO happening, Ethereum grounds to a halt for 20 minutes.
Right.
And,
so this is actually a misconception.
Can you reduce fees? Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's actually a misconception it happens with us quite a bit. The token is on the Ethereum network right now, right? So it's an ERC20 token. However, the Substratum network has nothing to do with the Ethereum network, other than at the point if it's still on that, and there's some discussion going forward, but if it's still on that, at the point when we get our compensation mechanism in there, which will be in our 0.5 becomes our first production release, then there'll be payouts done in that. However, they're not done immediately. So basically what happens with our network is, as you basically serve transactions based on how much you allocate, how long you stay online, how good of a steward you are, then you are compensated at a certain rate for that. However, it doesn't happen immediately. So what happens is when you hit a certain threshold, then, and you're a minimum threshold, you're allowed to identify when you really want it. But as long as it's at that minimum, then a payout happens on that. So all that information is not stored anywhere. It's sort of that off-chain approach, sort of like the Lightning Network, of like, okay, we're storing what you're owed here, but until we hit the point where you actually need to be paid, then we do an on-chain transaction on the Ethereum network. So at least in our example, the Ethereum network has no bearing on clogging up, the Substratum network, or making where transactions don't process fast enough. However, blockchain, that is one of the sort of drawbacks of blockchain. If you have something that's super high in and out, which is why you see things like decentralized exchanges run slower than stuff where it's like maybe a distributed version and it just runs with a standard database like Binance or something. There's a reason for that. It's because if it has to execute on chain and you have to have basically verification onto the ledger multiple times, then yes, that's going to slow things down. So I think that's why you see a lot of these approaches like the Lightning Network for Bitcoin, where things happening off chain and then you're just basically doing a one-time verification on chain. And I think that's a really great approach. So I would hope that most technologies that are implementing blockchain solutions but have heavy IO and have requirements for basically speed and can't have that sacrifice down to latency would be looking at things like that the same way we are.
Awesome. Colin, I want to put this one over to you, and that's about privacy and data protection. Now, we've been talking a lot about net neutrality and the potential of the big corporations to kind of mess us around, but they're actually getting all of our information. They know what's going on, and they're receiving all that currently, and we're just trusting them that, hey, Comcast's going to have a best interest in mind, and they can just hang out with my information. And of course, then the government, what Snowden revealed is that everything's being captured. So how can a new internet framework deliver better privacy results for the end user?
Because the end user has more options. And I mean, essentially, you always want to run over the specific, but I mean, when you're running through a central gatekeeper, then you always have that opportunity for the gatekeeper to control the flow that moves through it. So when you have a more distributed solution, which the internet's decentralized right now. I mean, decentralized is basically an oligarchy. You have a bunch of points that are not one central point. So, I mean, if it were centralized, it'd be one company controlling the whole internet. It's decentralized, but it needs to be distributed, which is the actual mesh topology that you really be wanting. So, I mean, if there's collusion or there's somebody monitoring traffic, I mean, it's obviously encrypted. You do packet obfuscation. There's a lot of ways to protect against that. I mean, in order to get your route to prevent from being, let's say, connecting to a peer that you want to connect, well, you can always choose another route, whether it be a little bit longer route or not. So, I mean, mesh topologies are more robust because you're not going to have downtimes. You're not going to rely on one single point or one ISP's network, or let's say, you know, the fiber that's owned by, you know, some company and then leases it to, you know, the ISP, and then they have a falling out and then your internet stops, or, you know, I mean, there's a lot of other factors that come into that. So things naturally evolve into distributed solutions, and that's what I'm seeing the internet becoming. So privacy does get preserved if you do use the proper encryption, and if you do have, let's say, the proper notification or knowing who is on the other side, so you don't get mad in the middle attacked. Or, you know, how do we know if, let's say, Comcast central data center is, let's say, not giving me a security certificate that's, you know, signed by them, and, you know, it's verified, and my browser says, okay, this is, you know, the known signature, or they're man in the middling, or, I mean, there's a lot of other things you can do to bypass the encryption. But the ultimate thing is that when we build it, we know. When we don't, it's really up to question. And when it's up to question, there's always those potentials for collusion. So as the internet is developed by the people for the people, I think the next step is what we're seeing. And I think the net neutrality is really bringing that to light for people to think about and saying, well, do I really trust this or do I not? And what are the next technological steps on all layers of the OSI to move forward in the right direction?
Nice. Justin, I want to get back over to you for a moment. It's a question about censorship, actually. Isn't censorship good sometimes? I mean, people always bring up the idea of, okay, if we don't have censorship, then the internet is going to be nothing but child porn and terrorism.
Yep, that's the two I always hear. So within our model, basically, yes, okay, so this, you know, may come across wrong. Censorship is good, but we don't need to be censored by the government or by corporations. It should be self-censored, self-governed, right? We believe, you know, at least at Substratum, we believe that people as a whole are good. You know, there's always that creepy guy in the basement, his mom's basement, maybe, that wants to look at child porn, but as a whole, we believe that people are good. So on a model that will allow, and this is a complex problem to solve, and we say this to everybody, you know, is why we're always open to feedback, collaboration, to Colin's point, is that we need a governance model, and we're working on a governance model that enables the users of the internet to identify things that should be on and shouldn't be on. You know, certainly, you know, I have no intention of having Substratum become the Darknet 2.0. But, you know, I want it somewhere that my children can be safe to go. And so we're going to rely on the good of people as a whole to basically decide what that is. And so, yes, to your point, yes, censorship is good in that way. It's just who is actually doing the censorship I think is the problem. And by allowing, you know, governments to make those censorship things right now, and you know, corporations, that I think that is really the pinch point where people are tired of that. And, you know, it's telling me that I can't view whatever just because it doesn't align with what my government believes is, you know, where we live in a small world but a big world, and all people should have the, you know, the same opportunities to view the information online, I think. So
yeah, and I mean, it really comes down to the tragedy of the commons. I mean, somebody goes out and they want to start some, let's say, nasty site that other people don't really want to be a part of or have. I mean, that becomes a tragedy of the common area, which is the internet. But ultimately, that comes on the other side, where when governments censor it, you have problems. I mean, ultimately, there's going to be people that are going to decide what they want and what they don't want on their network, and having a governance be able to determine that is, I think, the proper solutions, rather than complete total anonymity, dark web, whatever. I mean, those are already going to exist. People are already building them. People are already going to be doing that. I mean, when you have a free and open, by the people, for the people, you need to take into account the voice of the people. You know, ad vocem populi. I mean, if people don't, their voice is not heard, and then they're the ones that are building the internet, they're the ones that are using it, then you create that same type of problem where one bad apple poisons the whole crop, essentially. And I mean, I think the majority of people probably wouldn't want to see those types of activities happening on their internet. And I mean, the question really is, like, is the government spending time stopping that, or are they stopping censoring somebody from going on this other person advocating anything different? I mean, it just, you know, when you have these pyramid tower structures, it generally is one person dictating for thousands and millions. And then again, we have the butterfly effect, where it just negatively impacts a lot of people just for one person's opinion. I don't think that's the way that the future is going to be. And I think there's enough people that are seeing this and kind of taking a stand and finding alternative ways to just essentially render these conventional systems we have obsolete by creating new and better ones. And that's the beauty of technology, is it's a peaceful revolution. We don't have to go hold signs or lobby to change laws or things like that. I mean, we do technology that slowly makes the rest of it obsolete, and people use it. Just like, what the iPhone did to the flip phone. I mean, people are all about their Motorola Razors, and now everyone's about their iPhones, So
I laugh because I had one.
Yeah, you were a Razor guy, huh?
Hey, I've got another user question here for you guys. This is from Radiant Lunatic. Do you guys think tech at some point will surpass the need for ISPs altogether? Justin, you want to hop on that one first?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the long-term, I think approach with satellites and things like that, I think it absolutely can. So I see no reason why not. I mean, absolutely. If you look back, 100 years, you wouldn't have thought that we could do the things that we could do now. So absolutely, I don't see a reason why not. I don't think there's anything technologically preventing it from happening is probably the right answer to that. Whether or not, governments of the world want to let that happen. So that's sort of where, to Colin's phrase, for internet for the people, by the people, if everybody's willing to step in and sort of buy into that system and use it, then yes, absolutely. I think that can happen.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the stage of development. I mean, things go from a central point to an oligarchy and then eventually become a democracy. And I mean, I'm seeing the internet becoming more democratized, but it really just comes down to people supporting that. And the support of that comes back to your awareness of the issue, which then comes back to the circular problem of, well, if you can't have awareness because there's censorship and and so it's like, how do we break the cycle and bring it to a higher level? Because technology ultimately will, but I mean, I've seen technology come that could have significantly changed the world, but it was before its time, or people didn't recognize it, or they believed certain things because of perceptions that were given to them. So I mean, ultimately, if people really can look and take responsibility for your own opinions, take responsibility for your own thoughts, assess things, and see what works for you and see what doesn't, and not stand for something that doesn't, and find people to connect with and collaborate with that share those same views. I mean, that's going to grow these movements, and that's going to bring people together, and that's really what's going to change the internet. I mean, if people just accept ISPs and their bad customer service and we let it happen, I mean, satellites won't mean anything, because people will say, wait, what's a satellite? Don't I have to have some big dish, or isn't that going to be slow? Or I mean,
is that something on Kim Kardashian's butt? It's
yeah, exactly. So I mean, how do we help elevate the perspective of people to start paying attention that really matter? I mean, does the future matter to us, or are we going to look at when we're getting our next chocolate shake?
Exactly.
Hopefully that people like Justin, or people like me, or people like you, that just are thinking outside of this and speaking these things out and giving these opinions and perspectives, hopefully that those will inspire people to take a little bit more charge in their life and say, I'm no longer going to be a victim to this. I'm going to become a creator of something new. And that's what's going to change the internet. That's what's going to change the world, is enough people having that perspective.
That's it. And it's a massive equation when it comes down to it, and we do need people to be involved. And I think that's where crypto economics actually starts to become compelling, because if people can run software on their computer that's going to actually pay them money just to run it in the background, that flips the whole model on its head. You can actually be paid to run the internet of the future from your computer instead of paying to run the internet of the past from your computer.
Yeah. So we sort of all become an ISP in that way, right? We're all providing the internet for other people, and we're all receiving, a small portion of what it takes to do that. And, there's the technology gets better and better all the time. And, could 10 years ago, could we have done this? Probably not, things weren't fast enough, but now we can. Blockchain is still arguably futuristic in technology, right? We're still sort of understanding all the applications of it and all the things that we can do with it. And it's interesting to me now that you see sort of big companies sort of jumping on the blockchain bandwagon. I actually saw an IBM commercial the other day, which I promise you was an IBM cloud commercial before, and they almost had overlaid it with IBM blockchain at the end. Like it still said cloud at the bottom, IBM cloud. And I really think, I think big companies are just starting to understand it, and because they're slower to change. Like big companies are always slower to change, because they stick with what works. But smaller companies like ours you're really forging ahead and just being able to dive in there and say, hey, would this work and could this work, and really just take risks and see what'll happen with it. And that's really, if you look back through like history, even recent history, and you look at all these things that sort of changed the world, like Google, small group of guys, YouTube, small group of guys. And so it's these people that are willing to go out there and just like take this risk and say, all right, we're going to try something totally different paradigm. And if we fail, we're going to fall on our butts and we're going to crash and burn spectacularly, but we're going to try it nonetheless. Yeah. And then, they're able to pull it off. People that really willing to put the effort in and make sure that it's done right, so that to the point of what we were talking about earlier, regardless of what pressure is, outside forces are sort of telling you to do. So I salute Colin and everybody else out there. This is why we never ever talk bad about competitors, because whatever you're doing, whether we disagree on the methodology or not, you're taking the same risk that we are. Yep. And so, and I believe competition is the essence of free enterprise. Absolutely. And that's really, what's going to get us out there is just continually raising the bar, each of us for each other, until we get where we want to go. And, and I think that, it's just a privilege to really be in this space right now. It absolutely is. So.
Awesome. Well, just want to
I got about 5% battery.
So okay, we're gonna finish up here just momentarily, Colin. But I just want to respond real quick to Rebecca, and then we're gonna do a little quick wrap up here. So she says, "I'm less worried about censorship, but I think the mainstream media is a bigger issue." I just want to respond to that, Rebecca. The mainstream media, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, they are all owned by the giant mega corporations that also own the internet providers. So if you think that they're not going to start cutting out alternative media voices, it's exactly what's going to happen, because it goes against their business models and it goes against their corporate interests. Guys, final thoughts from you real quick. Colin, final thoughts on where we're going.
I mean, we're going to the place that we all really kind of stand together to go. So, I mean, we could go into a 1984, we could go into a new utopian renaissance. I mean, it really comes down to you. And if you believe that the world can be better, that's the first thing. You gotta the world's better before you can start imagining it being better. So I mean, just look at the things that count. Look at your life. Look at the things that you don't prefer, and then look at what this technology can do, and find ways that you can make your life something that you want to live in even more, because we all have that power, and we have that power together. We're not powerless in anything. We're not hopeless. We all have that choice, and it's the choice. Are we going to see the world become more of an oligarch, centralized power structure, or are we going to see it distributed, free, and open in a way that it promotes creativity and growth and happiness? And ultimately, that's what I'm doing. That's what Justin's doing. That's what you're doing, Lark. Hopefully it inspires you to think and find that within yourself, to see how you can do something for it, because there's nothing that feels better than knowing that you can really make a change for the world. And even if it's in a small way, you at least know, like putting a smile on someone's face or doing a good, kind deed. You know what I mean? Do something that makes you feel better. Make your life something that's more beautiful, and that's what we can all do together. And with the technology coupled with that, I think we have a real good chance at it. So I ain't gonna stop. And if you've given up, I hope you feel inspired to come back and do it.
Awesome, wise words indeed, Colin. Wise words indeed. Justin, real quick, closing thoughts.
Yeah, so absolutely, I agree with Colin. I mean, I know where we're going, as a company, and personally. I think that technology is opening up so many opportunities, but ultimately it's what we all agree in and buy in together. And I think that, absolutely, if we all want a free and open way to communicate, then, support projects that you believe in. Don't be so short-sighted. Go out there and really support them, and tell your friends and family about them, because it's going to take, all of us together to be able to do this. This, this technology is reliant on us, on the power of many, right? It's money won't solve it alone. You can't just as a money alone and go out and spend a whole bunch of money and make it happen. It takes everyone to buy into this process. And so ultimately it's up to everyone. And we will, as I've said before, I believe that people as a whole are good, and that this is what people want. And so I really believe that technology is going to enable this to be better, enable the world to be better, enable us to all have our voice more heard, and enable us to all basically be able to live a better life. And that's really what I'm excited to be part of that. And I know Colin is, and you know, it's been a pleasure chatting with both you guys. Really, truly has.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just a real quick one for the audience. If you need more information about Nexus or about Substratum, I've done a review of both of those projects, and I've interviewed both of these guys before. They're so gracious with their time. Guys, I want to thank you so much, Justin, Colin, for both coming on the show and talking to the audience, giving people the lowdown on what's going on and how technology can be the solution. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, man.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
And that's it, guys. Long live the blockchain, and we'll see you back here next time.